We continue now at the top of Daf Mem Daled Amud Aleph in Meseches Kiddushin. This is Kiddushin Daf 44a. And the previous summit, the Gemara had brought the Mishnah in Gittin. According to the Rabbanan in the Mishnah in Gittin, the halacha is when it comes to a Nara, both she and her father are able to receive her get. And Rabbi Yochanan makes a distinction and he says the Nara is able to receive her own get, but the Nara is not able to receive her own Kiddushin. And the Gemara said, what's the difference? Why is it that the Nara is not able to receive her own Kiddushin? And the Gemara said that the distinction between Kiddushin and Gerushin is that by Gerushin, when she accepts the Gerushin, she's going into the Rishus of her father, so her father does not mind that she's receiving the Gerushin. But when it comes to Kiddushin, then she's actually leaving the Rishus of her father, therefore the father doesn't want to allow her the power to receive her own Kiddushin. That's why she's not able to receive her own Kiddushin. That was the explanation of Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina in terms of Rabbi Yochanan. Again, Rabbi Yochanan makes a distinction within the Rabbanan's Shita between Kiddushin and Gerushin. And the Gemara now asks a question. The Gemara said on the previous Amud Utanan, which means we learned in the Mishnah. However, the Gemara really seems to be bringing a Brisa over here. The Brisa says that when it comes to Maimer is the equivalent of Kiddushin by Yibum. It says Ketana minha Erisin. Let's say you have a Ketana and her husband died when they were just in the Erisin stage. She was betrothed. Ein osim b'Maimer ela midasavia. There is no Maimer over there unless her father consents. The Hanara, but when it comes to a Nara, we're discussing a Nara right now. Bein midas atzma, bein midas avia. She can accept it even with her own, even without her father's consent. It could be midas atzma, or it could be midas avia. And the question is, by Maimer as well, that should be the same as Kiddushin. She's taking herself away from the Rishus of her father, but yet we're saying the Nara is able to accept the Maimer. And Rashi explains, Ketana, she shomeres yavam mino eris, and the Ketana, this girl who is a minor, she's a shomeres yavam, she was only in the erisin stage with her first husband. The adayin rishus avia aleh kozman shalo, we see at this point in time, her father's authority is still over her, as long as she hasn't been in the stage of Nesuin. V'hanara, but then it said in the Brisa that by a Nara, bein midas avia v'chulu, it could be her own das, or from her father, or with her father's consent. Al mahechet de mafkas atzma merishus av, kaimi nami rabbanan b'melsa. You see that even in a situation where she's taking herself away from the rishus of her father, she still is able to accept this Maimer even without the consent of her father, and so therefore that can't be the reasoning of Rabbi Yochanan. And the Gemara says, rather, if you're going to make a statement from Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina explaining Rabbi Yochanan, it should be made as follows. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina says, my time of the Rabbi Yochanan aliba the Rabbanan. What's the reason of Rabbi Yochanan according to the Rabbanan? Why do we make a distinction between Kiddushin and Gerushin? Kiddushin de midaita avia velohi. When it comes to Kiddushin is only something that can happen with her consent, and so therefore her father is able to do it. He can accept it for her, but she cannot. But Gerushin de balkarchab, Gerushin which works even against her will, bein hi bein avia, that can be accepted, received either by her or by her father. That's the distinction between Kiddushin and Gerushin. Kiddushin is something that is midaita, and Gerushin is something that is balkarcha. And Rashi explains Kiddushin de midaita de bo'inan das makna. The reason why Kiddushin has to be with her consent is you need the das, you need the consent of the person that's being makna, meaning over here she's being makna herself to her husband. Avia velohi, that's her father and not her. Shatorah zichsalo, the Torah gave the authority, gave the zichus to him. Aval gerushin sheyeshna bal karcha, but gerushin which works even against her will, bein hi bein avia, it doesn't matter if she's the one, it doesn't matter if her father. The malanu ledaita, what do we need his das for? Ki mekabelei iu nami al karacheu, even when he's receiving the gerushin, it's still against his will, so it doesn't make any difference. That's why by gerushin, since it's bal karcha, so she can receive it. And the Gemara asks, according to this version, Hare Maimer, but what about Maimer? Again, that's the Kiddushin stage, that's the Erisin stage of Yibum. The Midaita, that's also saying that's with her consent, it's not against her will. The Katani, Bein Hi Uvein Avia, and yet over there we say that she is able to receive it. It could be her, or it could be her father. And the Gemara answers, no, Hasam over there, but Maimer de Bal Karcha. We're also talking about Maimer, similar to Gerushin, we're talking about Maimer that is against her will. There is a shita that Maimer can be against her will. The Rebbe, it follows the position of Rebbe. The Tanya, as we learned in a Brisa, Hosa Maimer bi'evemto shalom midaita. Let's say a person performs Maimer by the first stage of Yibum with his sister-in-law, and that's shalom midaita, that's without her consent. There's a machlokas tanoim. Rebbe Omer Kane, Rebbe says that's a good acquisition. The Chachamim Omer Lo Kane, the Chachamim say it's not a good acquisition, and so therefore Maimer essentially is like Gerushin. That's why she is the one that's able to receive. And the Gemara continues, my time made the Rebbe, what is the reason of Rebbe? Gamar mi bia di yavama. He learns it out from bia by yibam. When you have bia by yibam, that also can be bal karcha. Ma bia di yavama bal karcha, just like we know that by bia, by the act of relations by yibam, by his sister-in-law, that is even against her will. Af hachanami bal karcha, so too by maimer of yibam, that also can be against her will. But Rabbanan Sabri and the Rabbanan say, no, you don't learn Maimer from Bia of Yavama. Rather, the Rabbanan say, Yalfinan Mikidushin, we learn our Maimer from regular Kiddushin. Ma Kiddushin de Midaita, just like a regular Kiddushin is with her consent. Af Hachanami de Midaita, so too when we're talking about Maimer by Yibam, that has to be with her consent. That's the Machlokas between Rebbe and the Chachamim. And the Gemara says, B'mai Kamiflagi, what are Rebbe and the Chachamim arguing about? Rebbe Savar Mili di Yavama mi Yavama Havale Lamel. If Rebbe holds, you should learn out Yibam from Yibam, meaning you should learn out Maimer by Yibam from Bia by Yibam. You should learn out things that have to do with Yibam from one another. Rabbanan Savri and the Rabbanan hold Kiddushin Mikidushin Havalei Lamelef. You should learn Kiddushin from Kiddushin. Maimer is essentially the stage of Kiddushin by Yibam, and Kiddushin, of course, is that same stage. Therefore, you should learn out Maimer from Kiddushin according to the Rabbanan, so it has to be Midaita. And the Gemara says, Hachanami mistabra kedekametaretz Rabbi Yochanan. It makes sense to say like Rabbi Yochanan is saying, meaning to say Rabbi Yochanan makes this distinction. As we said before, Rabbi Yochanan makes a distinction and says that by Gerishin she's able to receive it, Bein Avia, Bein He, the Nara, can receive the Gerishin but not the Kiddushin. That makes sense. Why? Midikatani Seifa, because it says in the end of the Brisa we brought above, it says Masha'ein Kain B'Kiddushin. It says that's not true by Kiddushin. That's referring over here, this Brisa, when it talks about the fact that by a Nara, Bein Midas Atzma, Bein Midas Avia, by Maimer, the Nara, it could be with her consent, without the father's consent, it goes on to say, Masha'ein Kain B'Kiddushin. We had that in parentheses up above, but it goes on to say that Kiddushin is different than Maimer. And so the Gemara is saying from that phrase that Kiddushin is different from Maimer, it seems that Rabbi Yochanan is actually correct, Masha'ein Kain B'Kiddushin, that we do make a distinction, just like we make a distinction between Maimer and Kiddushin, we also make a distinction between Gerishin and Kiddushin. Again, by Gerishin she's able to receive, but by the Kiddushin she's not able to receive. And the Gemara says Elanema, but if that's the case, it does say Masha'ein Kain B'Kiddushin, so we should say Tahavit Tiyuf to Reish Lakish. We should say that the phrase of Masha'ein Kain B'Kiddushin, that should be a refutation of Reish Lakish, because Reish Lakish said the exact opposite. Reish Lakish said that Kiddushin is the same as Gerishin in this regard. She's able to receive the Kiddushin as well. And the Gemara says, Amar Lach Reish Lakish will respond to you, Hamani Reb Yehuda. This Brisa, that's not following the standard Shita, that's following the Shita of Reb Yehuda. To Amar in Shtei Yadayim Zochos Kachas. Reb Yehuda says in general, even by Gerishin, Reb Yehuda says that you can't have two hands be Zocha. They both don't have the authority to receive at once. So according to Reb Yehuda, by Gerishin, that's also true. She's not able to receive, and therefore that's true by Kiddushin as well. And that's what the Brisa means, Masha'ein Kain B'Kiddushin. But the Gemara says, Reb Yehuda, but if you're going to say the Brisa is Reb Yehuda, Masha'ein Kain B'Kiddushin, Masha'ein Kain B'Gerishin Miboile. If you're already going to make a distinction and say that by Maimer she's able to receive, and you're saying, but that's not true by Kiddushin, you should have went even further. You should say Masha'ein Kain B'Gerishin, even by Gerishin, which is against her will, even there, Ein Shtei Yadayim Zochos Kachas, she's not able to receive. And the Gemara says, Ein Achinami. The Gemara says, you're right. Really, we should have said Masha'ein Kain B'Gerishin. Why didn't we say that? I did the Tana Maimer, the Dami L'Kiddushin, Tananami Masha'ein Kain B'Kiddushin. But since already the Bryce is talking about Maimer, which is similar to Kiddushin, we say Masha'ein Kain B'Kiddushin. But really, the Bryce could have said Masha'ein Kain B'Gerishin. But the Gemara continues for Rabbi Yehuda, but still, according to Rabbi Yehuda, so now it turns out that we're saying, according to Rabbi Yehuda, Ein Shtei Yadayim Zochos Ka'achas, and that applies by Gerishin and Kiddushin, but for some reason, it doesn't apply to Maimer. And so the question is on Rabbi Yehuda, why not? Maishna Maimer, what's the difference by Maimer, that suddenly over there, we don't apply the rule of Ein Shtei Yadayim Zochos Ka'achas, suddenly over there, she and her father are able to receive the Maimer. And the Gemara says, Hoelu Zakuka ve'omedis. Well, Maimer is different because Yibam in general is different. By Yibam, there's already a bond that happens instantly, right when her husband dies. So there's a bond of Yibam between her and her brother-in-law, and so therefore it's different over there. That's why she's able to receive the Maimer when it comes to the whole Yibam process. And the Gemara says, Hashda da'asas lachi. Well, now that you've come to this answer, now that you're saying Maimer is different because of Zakuka ve'omedis, so the truth is we can use that for Rabbi Yochanan going back. Rabbi Yochanan Nami, Rabbi Yochanan also lo tikshi lach. You should have had no kasha from the beginning, meaning even according to the original answer we gave according to Rabbi Yochanan. The second version of Rabbi Yochanan, that answer was that the difference between Gerushin and Kiddushin is Gerushin Bal Karcha. And therefore, since Gerushin is Bal Karcha, she can receive Masha Einkein. That's not true by Kiddushin. But in the original answer, the answer was that by Gerushin, she's going into the Rishus of her father, and by Kiddushin, she's leaving the Rishus of her father. And so the question was, well, by Maimer also, she's also leaving the Rishus of her father, and now we can give this exact same answer. Maimer is different. Shani Maimer is different than Kiddushin, even though in both cases they're going to the Rishus of her father, and she's leaving the Rishus of her father, but still Maimer is different. Hoalu Zakuk of Yomedis, because again over there's a bond that happens, this is the bond of Yibam, and therefore that's different than a regular Kiddushin. We could have given that answer instead of going on to the other version explaining Rabbi Yochanan. And Rashi explains, V'Rebbe, again it follows Rebbe's Shita. Rebbe is the one that says that Maimer can be against her will. D'Amar Maimer Tofes B'Yavam Bal Karcha. Again, Rebbe says that Maimer works by sister-in-law, even against her will. Im Zorak Lo Kesef, if let's say the Yavam throws the Yavam money, V'Yamar Lo Hareat Mekudeshesli, and he says Hareat Mekudeshesli, that would be Maimer by Yibam. Rebbe Amar Kana Keshar Maimer Lios Tzricha Get LaMaimer Zeh Im Ba Lachlotzla. Rebbe says that works. Again, if it's against her will, it works like any other Maimer. Bia the Yavam, when it comes to Bia by Yibam, so that we know is Bal Karcha. Kanyala Bal Karcha, the Nafkalan Mi Yibma B'Parakama the Yavama, so that's learned out from a pasuk that Bia works by Yavama Bal Karcha. And the Gemara said, V'Hachanami Mistaber the Hada Katani Gavi Maimer Bein Hi Bein Avia B'Maimer Bal Karcha Kai. It makes sense to say that when it says whether her or whether her father, that it's talking about Maimer against her will. Aval Bishar Kiddushin Avia V'Lo Hikar Reb Yochanan, but other Kiddushins would be different, and she would not be able to receive them. Why does that make sense? The Ketani Seifa Bahiv V'Hanara Bein Midas Avia Bein Midas Atzma, because it says in the Seifa of that brisa, which is talking about Maimer, so it says again that by Anara she can accept it without the consent of her father. It says Masha Einkein B'Kiddushin. It says that's not true by Kiddushin. That's why it makes sense to say this distinction. And the Gemara then said, according to that phrase at the end of the brisa, so that should be a question on Reish Lakish. Why does it say Masha Einkein B'Kiddushin? Again, according to Reish Lakish, by Kiddushin is the same thing as Gerushin, that she should be able to receive it. And the Gemara answered, no, I hear Rabbi Yehudahi. That brisa actually follows Rabbi Yehuda, and Gerushin also she wouldn't be able to receive. When it says Masha Einkein B'Kiddushin, it could have even been Masha Einkein B'Gerushin. V'im Tomer B'Maimer my time of Moda. Now, if you're going to ask, and the Gemara will ask this, why is Maimer different than both Kiddushin and Gerushin? Umayshna Maimer mi Gerushin. Why would Maimer be different than Gerushin? Areshneim al Karcha. They're both against her will. Lakamei Parachla. Again, we're gonna ask that later on. Umeshani Shekain Zakuk of Yomedis. And the Gemara is going to say there's a bond by Yibum, and that's why it's different. And that's what the Gemara asked. Masha Einkein B'Gerushin mi Bayil. If you're already saying it's Rabbi Yehuda, you don't have to say Masha Einkein B'Kiddushin. You could say Masha Einkein even B'Gerushin. V'Afila B'Gerushin. There's no Bal Karcha, even by Gerushin, which is against her will. Paul Rabbi Yehuda Nami V'Amar in Shtei Adayim Zochos Kachas. Rabbi Yehuda argues and says you can't have two hands that have the authority together. It has to be one or the other. Ma'ishna Maimer Kaven the B'Gerushin Polig Disnai Bal Karcha Ma'ishna Maimer Demoda. But again, the Gemara asks, as we just said above, the Gemara asks, why would Maimer, according to Rabbi Yehuda, be different than both Gerushin and Kiddushin? And the Gemara answered, Hoelu Zakuk of Yomedis, because there's a bond, Lafikach Tofes Bakaldu. That's why anything is effective in that situation. By Maimer, it's different than the other cases. By Maimer, you could have even Shtei Yadayim Zochos Ka'achas. Hashta Da'asas La'achi. Now that we've come to this answer, the Talia Taimisham the Zakuk of Yomedis, that we're saying that Maimer is different because it's Zakuk of Yomedis. Rabbi Yochanan Ami L'Taimid Kama, according to the first version that we had in Rabbi Yochanan. T'yoiv Rabbi Yochanan L'Melsayod Rabbanan the Gerushin Machnas Atzma L'Shosavia the Kiddushin Mafkas Atzma. We said that the reason of Rabbi Yochanan, he makes a distinction between Kiddushin and Gerushin because by Kiddushin she's leaving her father's Rishus, and by Gerushin she's going into her father's Rishus. We can keep that answer. V'yosivna mi Maimer, we asked a question from Maimer on that, to Mafkas Atzma, where there also she's leaving her father's Rishus. Lo Tikshi, it's no longer a question. Zika L'Shanu Yenami, Shani Maimer Holo Zakuk of Yomadis. We could just give the same answer, that over there by Maimer there's already a bond, there's a bond of Yibam, it's Zakuk of Yomadis, and that's why Maimer is different. And the Gemara continues to Nan. We learned in the Mishnah, Ha'ish Mekadesh as Bito Kashinara, a man is able to receive Kiddushin on behalf of his daughter when she is a Nara. Bo Vishlucho, he can receive it directly, or his agent can receive it on his behalf. And the Gemara says, Bo v'shlucho, and he can receive it, or his shliach can receive it. Yes, that is effective. Bo v'shlucha lo, but she cannot receive it, or her agent cannot receive it when she's a nara. And the Gemara says to Yufta the Reish Lakish, that seems to be a refutation of Reish Lakish, because here we're saying that Kiddushin is in fact different than Gerushin. Even though according to the Rabbanan, by Gerushin she is able to receive it, but by Kiddushin the nara is not able to receive it. Reish Lakish did not make that distinction between Kiddushin and Gerushin. And the Gemara says, Amar lach Reish Lakish will say to you, Hanami Reb Yehuda, this Mishnah also, our Mishnah also, it follows the sheet of Reb Yehuda. We're not making a distinction between Kiddushin and Gerushin. Reb Yehuda says, even by Gerushin, Ein shtei yadayim zochos ke'echad, that she's not able to receive it by Gerushin, and that's why she's also not able to receive it by Kiddushin. But the Gemara says, Umi matzes mukmes lach Reb Yehuda, can you really say that our Mishnah follows Reb Yehuda? V'akatani seifa, but the Mishnah goes on to say, towards the end of the Mishnah goes on to say, Ha'omer li'isha hiskachi li b'tamara zu, hiskachi li bazu. Let's say a person says to a woman, be mekudeshes to me with this date, be mekudeshes to me with this date, v'amrinon, and we say, man tana hiskachi. So it says over there, if you use the language of hiskachi each time, be mekudeshes to me with this tomorrow, and then you say again, be mekudeshes to me with that tomorrow, so one of the dates needs to be worth a shava pruta. You don't combine them. You don't say that you can combine the two, and together, he's doing the Kiddushin with the two of them together, and as long as together they're worth a shava pruta, that's enough. We don't say that. And the Gemara said again, v'amrinan mantana hiskachi, we say, who is this Tana that says that it's specifically when you say the word hiskachi each time, so then it's considered like you're dividing them into different statements. V'yamar Rab, and Rabbi said, Rabbi Shimon, it's the Tana Rabbi Shimon that applies by a carbon that you take when you take a false oath and you're regarding a deposit, you essentially steal by taking a false oath. V'yamar ad sheyomar shavua l'chol echad v'echad. Rabbi Shimon says that you have to say the word shavua each time. We'll see in a moment that if you say the word shavua each time, so then you're chayiv a carbon for each false oath. But you have to say the word shavua, that makes it a distinct, separate violation, and that's the same thing by hiskachi. If you say hiskachi each time, that makes them distinct. And so you see that the author of our Mishnah is not Rabbi Yehuda, you see that the author of our Mishnah is Rabbi Shimon. But the Gemara says, now if you're going to say, Kula Rabbi Yehuda, really our Mishnah is entirely Rabbi Yehuda, Uveprate Savarlak Rabbi Shimon, and happens to be Rabbi Yehuda agrees with Rabbi Shimon when it comes to making distinct statements. He says hiskachi would make it distinct, just like the word shavua would make it distinct by an oath. But the Gemara says that's not true. Umi Savarla, does Rabbi Yehuda really hold like Rabbi Shimon? It's not true. We're going to see in the following brayso, so Rabbi Yehuda is a separate shita than Rabbi Shimon. V'atanya, we learned in a brayso, so Zeh HaKlal, the rule is, Kolal eino chayv el achas, that if he puts it all together, and that is explained what exactly the word kolal means, that's explained in Meseches Shvuos, this is the sheet of Rabbi Meir, so if he puts it all together, he doesn't specify, so he's only chayiv one carbon. But if he specifies individually, chayiv al kol achas v'achas, then he's chayiv a different carbon for each false shvua that he takes. Divrei Rabbi Meir, these are the words of Rabbi Meir, that's Rabbi Meir's opinion. Rabbi Yehuda says, shvua lo lach. Let's say he takes an oath that I don't have what belongs to you, what's yours, and then in that case, chayev al kalachas v'yachas. Rabbi Yehuda says, you make those separate statements, you don't have to say the word shvua each time, not like Rabbi Shimon says, but you say lo lach, so you're chayev on each one. Rabbi Eliezer says, lo lach, v'lo lach shavua. If at the very end he says the word shavua, so then he's making it distinct. Then chayiv al kalachas v'yachas. Then he's chayiv on each individual oath. And Rabbi Shimon says, Liolam eino chayiv ad sheyomer shavua l'chol echad v'echad. That's the same Rabbi Shimon we had above. He's not chayiv an independent korban on each false oath unless he says the word shavua each time. And the point over here is, you see that Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon are separate shitas. So you can't say that Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rabbi Shimon when it comes to making independent statements. And so the Gemara instead says the reverse. Ella, rather, what we'll say is as follows. Kula Rabbi Shimon here. Really, our Mishnah in Meseches Kiddushin over here, it's all following Rabbi Shimon, and we'll have to say, according to Reish Lakish, Uveshlichos Savarlak Rabbi Yehuda, you'll have to say that Rabbi Shimon is the one that agrees with Rabbi Yehuda. It's not that Rabbi Yehuda agrees with Rabbi Shimon by specification, it's the other way around. Rabbi Shimon agrees with Rabbi Yehuda when it comes to Shlichos, meaning to say, Rabbi Shimon agrees with Rabbi Yehuda that Gerushin and Kiddushin are the same, and Ein Shtei Yadayim Zochos Ka'achas, the the daughter, in the case of the Nara, she's not able by both, not only by Gerushin, according to Rabbi Yehuda, but also by Kiddushin, she's not able to receive the Gerushin or the Kiddushin. And Rashi explains, Rabbi Shimon Hidamer, the Gemara said that our Mishnah in Kiddushin, which has Hiskachi, that's considered separate, so that follows the Shita of Rabbi Shimon. Gabi Chamisha Tovano. So the case over there by Rabbi Shimon is there are 5 people that are claiming from him, so 10 Lanu Pikadon, they all say, give us the Pikadon, Sheyesh B'yadcha, that you have our Pikadon, you have our deposit. V'yamar Shvua She'en Lach B'yadi Lo Lach V'lo Lach. Let's say he says Shvua, I don't have yours, he just says the word Shvua once. Eino Chayiv Elachas, he's only Chayiv 1. He's only Chayiv 1 carbon. And Sheyomar Shvua L'chol Echad V'yachad, unless he says the word Shvua each and every time. Maybe you'll suggest that Rabbi Yehuda agrees with Rabbi Shimon in this regard. You have to say the word shvua to make them independent. And the Gemara said that's not true because we have a bunch of different shitas. We have a brisa. Rabbi Meir says if he generalizes it, he's only chayiv 1. In Meseches we'll explain what does it mean kolal and what does it mean parat according to Rabbi Meir. Shvua she'ein lach biyadi vilo lach chayiv asham gezelos. If he says shvua, again, that I don't have your item, I don't have your deposit, and not yours, and not yours, and not yours, then he's chayiv in asham gezelos. And Rashi notes, lo lach, that it has to be dafka below vav, that it actually has to be without a vav in order for them to be separate. Avol vilo lach, but if it's vilo lach and vilo lach, then klolahav, then it's considered a klal, then it's considered generalized, and you're actually only chayiv 1. And then we had the shita of Rabbi Eliezer, lo lach, vilo lach, shavua. Let's say that you say the word shavua at the end, the bo'inon shavua ba'achroni, say the word shavua at the end, avolim hizkir shavua techila. But let's say he says the word shavua at the beginning, lo shadina nakulu klolahav. Then you don't say that the word shvua is independently going on each one, but rather you say it's considered generalized and there's just one carbon that's brought, just one carbon of Asham Gezelos. And finally, the Gemara said the reverse answer, Ela Masnisin de Iskachi, Rabbi Shimon, he rather the Mishnah which says by Iskachi, they're considered independent, and each date will have to be a Shava Pruta, you can't combine them. You'll have to say that Rabbi Shimon holds like Rabbi Yehuda when it comes to Shlichus, meaning Diavia Velohi, meaning it's her father only who can receive, and not her. That's true not only by Kiddushin, it's true by Gerushin as well. And the Gemara continues, Rabbi Asi lo ol levei midrash, Rabbi Asi did not go to the base medrash. Ashkechel Rabbi Zera, he found Rabbi Zera. Amar Lei said to him, my Amar ha'idna be midrash, what was said today in the base medrash? Amar Lei, so Rabbi Zera said to him, to Rav Asi, afanalo ayal, I also didn't go to the base medrash. Rabbi Avin hu da'ayal, but Rabbi Avin, he's the one that went into the base medrash. V'yamar, and he said, he reported as follows, Chavrusa kula Rabbi Yochanan, everybody in the base medrash, they all agreed with the sheet of Rabbi Yochanan, meaning we do make a distinction between Gerushin and Kiddushin, even though by Gerushin the Nara is able to receive the get, but by Kiddushin the Nara is not able to receive the Kiddushin. V'tzavach Reish Lakish, and Reish Lakish screamed when everybody agreed with Rabbi Yochanan. Reish Lakish screamed out, Kikaruchia, he screamed out like a crane, and he said, V'yatzav Haisa. It says in the pasuk, V'yatzav Haisa, she's divorced and then she gets married, meaning we should compare the two, and they should be the same. Gerushin and Kiddushin should be the same, just like by Gerushin she's able to receive according to the Rabbanan, so too by Kiddushin she should be able to receive. V'leka da ashkach be, but nobody paid attention to him. They all said the halach is like Rabbi Yochanan, that we do make a distinction between Gerushin and Kiddushin. And the Gemara continues the story, Amar Lei, so he said to him, Rabbi Avin bar Samachu, is Rabbi Avin someone we can rely on? He's reporting that this was said in the Beis Medrash, maybe he's reporting inaccurately. Amar Lei said to him, yes, we can rely on it, Kimin Yamo Latigni, because it's been a very short amount of time. It's like the amount of time that a fish comes out of the sea and you put it in the frying pan, meaning it's been such a short amount of time since he left the Beis Medrash when he gave this report, therefore we can rely on it. Again, it's like the amount of time from the sea to the frying pan. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, Ano lo Rabbi Avin Rabbi Chia, v'lo Rabbi Avin bar Kahana. When I heard this story, I didn't report it as Rabbi Avin Rabbi Chia or Rabbi Avin bar Kahana. It was not Rabbi Avin the son of Rabbi Chia or Rabbi Avin the son of Kahana. El Rabbi Avin Stam. It's just reported as Rabbi Avin Stam, meaning to say just plain Rabbi Avin, without identifying exactly which Rabbi Avin it was. And the Gemara says, Lamai nafkamina, what difference does it make exactly which Rabbi Avin? And the Gemara says, Lamirma, didei adidei, that would be, let's say we would have a contradiction between something he said here and something he said somewhere else. You have to know exactly which Rabbi Avin we are talking about. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, Boy minei Rava me Rav Nachman. Rava asked Rav Nachman the following question, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Mem Dalid Amud Beis.